Now, media. Everybody talks about them, but nobody does anything about them. Now, that's just kidding. Everybody talks about it, and everybody does everything about them. Now, the crisis happens on base. Good for you. Why? Because you can control the access to the media on base. Now, what happens during a crisis? Remember, I gave you that formula and everything that said logic is overruled by emotion. So what are the cops going to do? What are the wing commander? What's logistics going to do? What's everybody going to do? They're going to want to bunker down. They're going to want to say, hey, we haven't got time for me. We can't, and it doesn't matter if you practice it, whatever. It'll be better if you practice it, but I can't guarantee that's going to solve all your problems. What's going to happen is most of these people are going to say, we don't got time to put up with media. To hell with them anyway. Here's the problem. Again, you're going to make them guess. They're going to guess, and trust me, the media are like big dogs. You either feed them, they go through your garbage, but either way they're going to eat. You're going to make them guess, and you're going to make them eat the garbage. And it ain't going to be good for the Air Force. So what you do is say, sir, what I want to do is set up a media center away from the crash site so we can control them, come on, bring things in. Now, what's one of the things that, we're going to talk about television real quick. What is television? Television is pictures. You're looking at me right now and everything, is I could just as easily have called you up and done this, but no, things are just more interesting with pictures. Television, a crash. What are they going to see? What are they going to look at? Well, what you're going to get is, if there's a plane crash, they want to go see the smoking hole. Is that the image, the visual image that you want the Air Force to have? No, of course not. So what are you going to give them in your crash? In other words, when you put together a packet, you're going to have B-roll of whatever aircraft just went down. And this B-roll is going to show it going through the clouds, flying around, everything, being in, beautiful, everything's great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the image that will go out over television. Now, will they get pictures of the smoking? Yeah. But how many TV channels are there? There are a lot of TV channels. So people are sitting there and they're surfing the channels and everything. Chances are just as good they see the picture of the airplane going through the clouds, they do a smoking hole. If you don't give them the B-roll and everything, there's no chance they get to see the airplane flying around in the clouds looking good. Now, people ask me, how come there's always bad news on TV? Or how come you only see bad things on it? That's the easiest question in the world to answer. It's because that's all we buy, we the American consumer. I'm going through I'm switching channels, everything going like this, nodding my head. If I see, good news, balloons going up, elementary school just opened in Iraq and everything, am I going to stop there as a viewer? No, I'm not going to stop there as a viewer. I've seen plenty of happy people. I don't want to see happy people. I want to see something blowing up. Sure enough, I go and there are a couple more things. Well, there are some pictures of something that just blew up, meaning our airplane and everything. Am I going to stop there? Absolutely. We've got the technology today that I could see firefights live from Afghanistan. I'll sit there and I'll stop there happily and everything, and guess what I've done? I have just bought the product that the news agencies are trying to sell me. They're saying, hey, we can charge more, for advertising because this guy stopped at this time, and they know when you stop and don't stop and everything. They know what sells and doesn't sell. So all they're doing is selling us a product that we're buying. It doesn't make them good. It doesn't make them bad. What's it make them? It makes them businessmen and women. They're like I said, Walmart, IBM, Disney World. Everybody's selling a product. That's what news is selling. If you understand that, you can kind of work with them a little better, see where they're coming from. If you're not giving them anything to sell, they'll find something. They'll find something. And it may not be to your advantage because, again, they'll be guessing. They'll be guessing. So you got to feed that beast. And unfortunately, depending on the size of the crisis, what's going to happen? You have satellite trucks come in. You got this, you got that. Now, what are they going to want? One of the things, is B-roll. We talked about that. The other thing they're going to want is a spokesperson. Now, you may have been to DINFOS, you may not have been to DINFOS, but what they're going to say is, you should do this, and you should media train that, and all this other stuff. Good advice, good advice. However, a couple of things you ought to know. Number one, who's the most effective spokesperson for a crisis like this? Believe it or not, it's a female. The reason is they seem more sympathetic than males. It's just a fact. So if you get a good female spokesperson, that doesn't mean, okay, we're going to line up 10 females and see who does best on TV and everything. Just keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. And what are they most effective at? something that involves children. In other words, and we'll talk a little bit about environmental and some long-term crises and everything, but anytime you got something that involves children, having your wing commander up there with his hands behind his back, speaking or reading off a note and everything is not going to do you much good. I would suggest you get somebody that comes across sympathetic. Would it be the chaplain, whatever? Is sometimes they're your best spokesperson, not necessarily the person in charge, but the person that can convey an expression of I'm really sorry that this happened, et cetera, et cetera. Some people are good at it, some aren't. It'd take a priest, a psychologist, and exorcist to tell you why some people come across as empathetic and other people don't. But you as the public affairs officer have to be the one to decide that. Now, we were talking about, I'll tell you what, let me finish the third audiences. And this one's going to kind of surprise you a little bit. Community relations. Like, what are you talking about? Let me tell you. Is you got a crisis, and it was long-term, short-term, whatever. Is you're going to have 3 audiences, internal media, ComRel. Why is ComRel an audience, and how do I get the word out to them? Good grief. You've got plenty of MAC, military affairs committees and everything. Take a little bit of time and call them up. Call the MAC chairman up and say, hey, I know you're hearing rumors that this has happened or this crisis and everything. If you don't want to do it, get somebody else to do it. It takes about 5 minutes. Why do you do that? Well, number one is people will be calling them. Their friends know that they're the head of the Military Affairs Committee. They may feel like they've got more information than the general public. So their friends are calling them up, and they've got to say, they have to admit, says, hey, the Air Force hasn't called me up. I don't know what's going on. They know that doesn't feel to you. You might have some hard feelings that way. But you can use them as communications, to get the word out to some of your opinion leaders. Don't forget community relations. Get somebody in your community relations staff to give, the ComRel, MAC chairman, mayor's office, all these other people. Don't forget them. Don't forget them because they can be very useful. They can be very useful. Now, you heard me talk about long-term and short-term crises. What's a short-term crisis? A short-term crisis is something that usually happens like that and is not going to happen again in the immediate future. What do I mean? Plane crash. You got real problems if a plane crashes and then 5 minutes later another plane crashes and 5 minutes later another plane crashes. That would be a real problem. Doesn't happen and everything. Usually it's a plane crash, okay, that happened. Or a major crime or whatever. That's a short-term crisis. In a lot of ways, a lot better for you because you know what you're reacting to. You may not have all the numbers, you may not have all the information, but you know what you're reacting to. What's a long-term crisis? And there are a lot of long-term crises. One might be weather. If you're down on the coast and everything, a hurricane's coming. Well, you got prior hurricane. This is a crisis because everybody's evacuating, blah, blah, blah. Then the hurricane hits, you got your ride-out team, damage, this and this and this, and then everybody's got to come back, find out what the damage is, what's the long-term effects. That's a long-term crisis. All right, what's another long-term crisis? Now, I will tell you this is the worst one you can have, is a huge environmental problem. The thing that makes environmental problems so dastardly is that they're insidious. You can't say what the long-term effects are going to be. You get up there and you say, hey, we found some toxic waste underneath the elementary school on base. Oh my gosh. All right, well, what does that mean for my kids? What do you do about my kids? Well, we're doing all these tests, we're trying to work things out. That's not going to satisfy any parents. Parents out there, would that satisfy you if your kids were at that elementary school? Of course not. Of course not. News by definition is conflict. You never turn on the news and say, hey, everything seems to be going great today and everything. Why don't you go check out another channel? Because here everything seems to be going all right. It's conflict by definition. So when you start messing with people's kids and that kind of thing and something in an environmental, in other words, working environmental and it affects kids, that's about as bad as it gets. Because you've got emotion, you've got unknown, you've got every bad thing that you can possibly think about. All you can do as communicators is say, we promise, we pledge that we will get the information out to you just as soon as we get it. We're not going to hide anything because we're parents ourselves and we would not want to put anybody through this. You've got to make that believed in a long-term environmental crisis. And I tell you what, they can wear you out. They can wear you out and everything. All right, so we've gone through the crisis and everything's, in other words, kind of winding down. We've had our things. What are you going to do after the crisis? Let me erase my, is that the erase? There we go. I'm a good eraser. There we go. One. Work backwards. What do I mean? Oop. Look at that. See, IFB made it all the way out that time. Caught it, shoved it back in my ear. What I mean by work backwards is get that log and go backwards on it to the beginning. Why would you do that? Why would you? Trust me, it's almost like reading something. It's almost like you will understand it that much more if you work backwards, if you go backwards. Now, how many times have you sat there and you say, hey, we need to do an after-action report. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? What will most public affairs shops do when they do that? They'll sit around, they'll get to their conference room, and all 10 of you, all 5 of you, all 20 of you, all, doesn't make any difference. We'll sit there and say, we could have done this better, we could have done that better, we could have done that. Don't do that. What good? You can do it. There is some utility to it, but what did 90% of your crisis, have to deal with? Usually it had to deal with other people. Call in, the chief of security police. Call in, whoever, operations. Call in the people and let them tell you, what you could have done better or how you came across. Now, that takes a certain amount of confidence to be able to do that. But I guarantee you'll learn a lot more if you do that. If it's just a bunch of public affairs people sitting around saying, we could have done this, we could have done that, and everything, that's a self-licking ice cream cone. You're going to, okay, I know what I'm going to do different next time within my little thing that I control. But how did we come across to all the people that, actually had something, to do with us? What could we have done different? Should we have media trained somebody? Should we have done this? Should we have done that? Should we have, go to the cops and say, did we get everybody on base? That's a problem sometimes if you got the crisis on base. Is you say, I got everything set up. Some people set up a media center. Sometimes they set it up in the chapel. Sometimes they set it up in the education center. Sometimes I've seen them set up in gyms, all this other stuff. But the thing is, what they forget is, how are they going to get from the main gate, how the media are going to get from the main gate to wherever our media center is? Well, we'll work out something when the time comes. Don't fall into that trap and everything. What you do is put somebody from PA out at the main gate and say, listen, we're going to start letting people on from about 10 to 11 today. And that person goes out there, and the cops, because cops are going to be reacting emotionally. Does anybody want to see media come on their base and start reporting on things that went wrong? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So you got to put a PA out there and say, these are the media we expect to have come. What can we do to get this process to work a little bit smoother? What can we do? Now, how do you get them from when they get signed into the main gate to wherever your media center is? Ask the cops. I guarantee you on your base, I promise you this, there's more cops than there are PAs. So these cops can come in and say, hey, would you escort these, this TV, radio, whatever, and move them over to the media center. That would be, in other words, that would be a big help. Plus, it makes them feel like they've got some sort of control over the media. They'll let you do that. That'll work out for them.